Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, June 10th, 2025, and our friend Colonel Wilkerson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Good to be with you, Nima.
Larry, what's going on in the United States with Donald Trump and the negotiation with Iran? And here is what Donald Trump said, Larry. Let me play a clip for you.
Iran on Thursday, so we're going to wait till Thursday.
And what's
for
the
that
main
proposal.
impediment to getting a deal?
Well, they're just asking for things that you can't do. They don't want to give up what they have to give up. You know what that is. They seek enrichment. We can't have enrichment. We want just the opposite. And so far, they're not there. I hate to say that because the alternative is a very, very dire one, but they're not there. They have given us their thoughts on the deal, and I said, it's just not acceptable.
Topic for
Yeah, they're not there. Where is there that they're not there?
I think he means enrichment. This morning, news came through, and it's been verified a couple of times. I'm not totally confident it's true, but I think it is, that Netanyahu and Trump talked on the phone, and that Netanyahu said, unbelievably, you might think, probably subterfuge, but nonetheless, he supposedly said, I'm okay with 3.67% or whatever it is, percentage enrichment. So I'm not going to go to war over that. So Trump has new leeway now with regard to the most, how should I call it, pernicious pressure on him, which is the pressure from Israel, and the threat to go to war. And along with that, supposedly came the promise that he wouldn't go to war and that Trump could negotiate from the perspective of, yes, they could have that low level enrichment. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, then Trump doesn't have a leg to stand on now, having pronounced what he pronounced. Even if it is, I see a torturous road ahead because I think they are predisposed to screw this one up. And I don't say that because I think the president's intent is to screw it up, but I think there are enough people arrayed around Donald Trump, and they've shown their ugly fangs, F-A-N-G-S, fangs as in snakes, pretty prominently over Ukraine and not so prominently, but nonetheless clearly over Gaza. And they're in the Congress and elsewhere, and they don't want this to happen at all. So they don't want any kind of deal. What they want is Netanyahu to attack Iran, and the United States have to follow on, or reasonable facsimile thereof. And this morning, Scott Ritter broke something to me that I was not aware of, that the Central Command commander has been tasked to plan a nuclear option and to brief it to Trump within the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, as I said back on that podcast and to Scott, I've been in briefing rooms before where we were tasked by the National Command Authorities. That's what we called them then, President and the Secretary of Defense. Rumsfeld changed that. But nonetheless, then we were briefed by the NCA that they wanted an option, a nuclear option. And I said, so if the president says he wants a nuclear option, or the Secretary of Defense says he wants a nuclear option, that doesn't mean necessarily that he's contemplating using it. But Scott was pretty hard over that they were, in fact, hard over on using the nuclear option to take out Iran's nuclear program. Because as Scott rightfully said, it's not true that, people keep repeating this, that the U.S. intelligence community, insinuating that it still sticks to this view found in 2009 in a national intelligence estimate that Iran did not have the intent to build a nuclear weapon. Well, that's fine, except the JCPOA came along, I think arrested and impressed the Iranians, arrested that impetus of building one completely, and impressed the Iranians with the fact that they could stop the program, halt it completely, keep it, if you will, on ice, but at a very low level, suitable to the IAEA inspections and such, and go ahead, because they thought the JCPOA would get sanctions relief and so forth. When we didn't render the sanctions relief, when Kerry and Obama essentially cheated them and didn't give them what they wanted up front, then they began to hedge. And then when Trump canceled the JCPOA and canceled the U.S. membership, and therefore pretty much put the whole thing in the hangar, then they said, okay, fine, we're going back and we're going to create, and this makes our intelligence estimate wrong now. We're going to create a threshold nuclear state. And that's what they've done. When you get up to 50, 60% enrichment, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to a nuclear weapon. It's not any big trial. You can enrich the uranium to the extent that you need it within a week. So that makes them, like Japan, a threshold nuclear state. That's a different proposition if you're looking at it from the perspective of Donald Trump and failing on the talks. So I can understand that maybe Scott's right, that the Central Command commander is planning for a U.S. strike on Iran. And one of the options in that planning is a nuclear strike, because a nuclear weapon is all that would take out the deepest elements of what Iran is doing and the most dangerous elements. They put the most dangerous elements the most deeply underground. So that's a little bit frightening. That means this deal has a whole new dimension to it now. Let's prevent nuclear war, please. So let's make a deal. So let's both sides be amenable to the other side's red lines and so forth. I think we have to say to the Iranians, you can enrich to that level that the Non-Proliferation Treaty allows you to enrich. And we'll provide for the other enrichment that you might need for medical purposes or whatever through a deal with a consortium or whatever that gives you the uranium when you need it. But are we there? I don't know. This administration does not impress me with its ability to do the details. And this president does not impress me with his ability to oversee those details and make sure they're going the right way. So I still have deep concerns over this.
I think nobody can deny the threats and the outcome, the devastating outcomes of any sort of conflict, any sort of war between the United States and Iran in the region, in the Middle East. Because it's not just about Iran and the United States, it's the global economy. It's all, we are going to have a devastating shock coming to each and everybody's life. But Larry, when it comes to Donald Trump, do you think that they're making their mind to go to war with Iran? Because that's out of my imagination. I cannot understand if Donald Trump, who's so obsessed with the competition with China, goes to war with Iran, that he knows if he goes that way, that would be the end of any sort of competition, any sort of rivalry with China. Go ahead, Larry.
No, that's all well said and rational. I'm not sure rational is the right way to describe this administration. And as my students would tell you on both campuses, George Washington and William and Mary, increasingly, and they came to this conclusion themselves in seminar after seminar, the decisions in the United States that are fateful decisions, which we defined as decisions that send young men and young women to die for state purposes and kill other people, war, in other words, but also clandestine operations, are increasingly made on domestic political concerns. That is to say, they're not made for international concerns. They're not made for security concerns. They're not made for the kind of concerns that most Americans would think presidents would make national security decisions. They're made because of domestic political considerations. That's becoming almost the dominant element in national security decision making. So if the domestic political consideration is Israel and all the forces aligned therewith, then I could see some insane things happening. And you're right. We pointed this out this morning. Were we to use a nuclear weapon or even just go to war with Iran in a serious sort of way, the world economy would react very negatively, very negatively. And the person or the state, the nation suffering the most from that negativity would be the United States, I suspect. So it's not a sound decision-making process they're even contemplating, let alone coming to the end and making that ultimate decision to God forbid, use a nuclear weapon or just to go to war conventionally. Not smart at all, as you pointed out.
Let's zoom out a little bit to see the main reason that Donald Trump is behaving this way and trying to put a lot of pressure on Iran is nuclear weapons. If that's the case, if we assume that's the case, that's the main reason. So if they go attack on Iran, if I don't know how capable that attack would be with the case of Yemen, with the experience against Yemenis, let's assume they're going to use nuclear bombs. Iran can produce nuclear weapons within months, weeks, and they're going to be back. Now the reality going to change. Everything's going to change, and they have to face the new reality. I don't know if they would be prepared to go against a nuclear Iran, a country that is a nuclear state and with nuclear weapons. I don't know if they calculate, they estimate what would happen in the aftermath of any sort of confrontation. That is hugely dangerous.
Well, look at what Iran's looking at. The same thing you and I are looking at. They're looking at Gaddafi in Libya, where there was no nuclear weapon, and we destroyed Libya and killed Gaddafi. And they're looking at Kim Jong-un in North Korea, where he is a nuclear weapon, and we haven't done anything. That's Iran's template. That's what they're thinking about. We have a nuclear weapon, they won't bother us. We don't have a nuclear weapon, we're always going to have to be concerned that they're going to attack us. And Israel too. Now with Israel, it's a little bit different because then you become in a state of stasis confrontation, nuclear confrontation, because both of them have nuclear weapons. But still, that's a relative deterrent. There are people who've argued with me, for example, when we were talking about having a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. One of the counter arguments was that, well, you're not going to be able to achieve that, not long as Israel is there. So you achieve the second best situation. You let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And then you have a balance of terror. And that balance of terror will be better than having Israel, the only state in the region with a nuclear weapon, which is what makes it so preposterous and stupid that Lyndon Baines Johnson and others and the French helped Israel get a nuclear weapon. Utterly stupid that we did that, because then they became what you might call a tyrant with the ultimate solution should anyone challenge their tyranny. That's what Iran's up against in the region. And to a certain extent, that's what Saudi Arabia and the GCC and others are up against too, which is why the Saudis have been talking about potentially becoming a nuclear power, at least a threshold nuclear power. And as I've said before, I think the Saudis have a deal with Pakistan, and I think the Saudis will get 20 or 30 nuclear warheads just like that if Iran explodes a bomb. And Saudi Arabia will present Iran with a fait accompli. You've got a bomb, I've got 20 or whatever. But this is a dangerous game to be playing, and we're the ones who stir the pot of that game, and we're stirring it majorly right now.
Larry, when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons, do you think that the international community, when it comes to Russia, China, the international community, what would be if the United States uses again the nuclear bombs against Iran? What would be the backlash, the outcome, or somehow some sort of pressure coming on the United States?
Tremendous pressure. I think the markets would react to it. I think the world economies would react to it. I think the world situation in general would react to it, and all those reactions would be negative. It would be confirmation, for one thing, in the minds of everyone that Putin is right. You know, Putin has hinted at, and even on one occasion said, that he would never be the country in the world, the nuclear power state in the world, to use nuclear weapons first. But he then said, I know who would be. And he's right. He's talking about us. I think he said something like, who used them in 1945? Twice. He's right. And that would be a shock to the world that would equate with and maybe even surpass the shock that the world's suffering right now from our lack of willingness to do anything about Netanyahu, to do anything at all. You may have seen that the UN Special Rapporteur said, Albanese, she said yesterday, look, there's the Greek Navy, there's the Italian Navy, there's the Turkish Navy, and here's Israel once again stopping a boat in international waters and apprehending the crew. At least they didn't kill them. They didn't fire a weapon and blow the bow off their boat like they did Conscience, that had to limp into port in Malta. They just boarded the boat and took them all prisoners. And now, that, as I understand it, they're deporting them. Probably in part, at least, because Greta Thunberg was on board, and that would have been publicity that the Israelis just didn't want right now, had they done anything untoward, fired a torpedo into the boat or something like that. But the Special Rapporteur's got a point. Look at all these cowards, including us. But I mean, this is their lake. The Mediterranean is their lake. Greece, Italy, Turkey. Come on. They're violating international law in international waters. What is it the United States does all the time that it claims it has the right to do because it's doing it for the world? Freedom of navigation. It patrols the South China Sea to make sure freedom of navigation exists. Of course, that's a bullshit cover for, wanting to challenge China. But nonetheless, it means something elsewhere, where the United States Navy is the force on the high seas that ensures that straits and legal waterways stay open and free to world commerce. Well, look at what Israel's doing in the Mediterranean and international waters. This is crazy. This is nonsense. The United States should be stepping in, but everybody knows we're not going to. So why aren't these other countries stepping in? Because they're all cowards, or because they make so much money off Israel, which is fundamentally our money, but it's Israel passing it to them.
Iranian intelligence said that they have obtained a lot of documents from Israeli nuclear program. By the way, these documents show that IAEA cooperated with Israelis, handed those confidential documents to Israelis. How, Larry, do you think that would influence the relationship between IAEA and Iran?
Good question. I know that they just reported yesterday, I think, that Iran was in violation of some of their more serious rules and regulations. I don't know if that was prompted by this as a counterstroke, or if it was legitimate, and it could have been legitimate because of what I just said before. They are a threshold nuclear state. There's no question about that. Just from going to where they are at about 50 to 60% to the 90+% needed for a weapon is just a matter of weeks, and not very difficult at all. Excuse me. Turn my phone off. That's a very interesting revelation. I would love to know what the details are. I won't get them, of course. Is it just the dealings of Israel with other nuclear parties, for example, like the IAEA, or is it locations of bins of storage, of racks of warheads, of weapons? Is it more even than that? Does it give Iran targeting data, for example? And it's got missiles that could hit these things. And it's got missiles that could do major damage to them, if not perhaps even destroy them. So what is this really? Is this everything? And is it an operational plan for a strike if Iran wanted to make one? And how long is its life if it is? Because, you can move things fast if you want to. There are not all that many places in Israel. It's not a very big place where you can move this kind of stuff that's very highly, shall we say, not highly hidden, but carefully stored away. There are only so many places you can do that. So I don't know. It could be a real blow to Israel. I suspect it is, but they're not going to fess that up. They're not going to say it is. But it could have been part of the motivation for Netanyahu to suddenly, on this telephone call with Donald Trump, say, no, You can let them have 3.67 or whatever it is percentage enrichment, and I won't go to war with them.
The other side of the document is that Iran's Supreme National Security Council announced that the target bank of Israel is now on the table of Iran's armed forces. And it seems to me that they have managed to obtain Israel's entire bank of targets within Iran. They know what if they attack Iran, what would they do, and what are the main targets of the Israel, and they can defend themselves. It's huge because they in the Iran, when you follow the Iranian media, it's a lot of documents, and they're just going around and finding the news and finding the information in these documents. But as time goes by, we're going to learn more about this.
Yes.
But with what we've learned so far, Larry, in terms of the targets, in terms of even the targets for Iran to attack Israel, these are huge. And I don't know if Netanyahu, maybe that's why Netanyahu has decided to go, as you've mentioned, that Netanyahu said to Donald Trump, I'm okay with 3.6% of enrichment. Let's go find some sort of solution.
Could very well be. And as I said, Israel's not that big a space to find alternative locations to move things around. And if they did move things around, you bet Iran would know where they moved them to. They just arrested this guy in Jerusalem, I think it was, who was supposedly leaking secrets to Iran. That's the reason they said they arrested him. That may be true. There are spies in Israel too, just as there are spies in Iran.
These two countries have long history. They're spying on each other for many years.
And the Israelis have this sort of hubris. They think they spy well and the Iranians spy poorly. That's not necessarily true.
Larry, if with the case of these documents, that Israelis had the documents from Iran, right now Iran has the documents from Israel, do you think that these sort of revelations on the part of both countries, is that going to help facilitate the talks between the United States and Iran, or somehow complicate the situation for the United States?
Well, if in fact the Israelis are, according to Netanyahu, willing to accept the low level of enrichment, we've just established a baseline for the negotiations that should be acceptable to both sides. And then all we're really talking about, I know there are other things that we were going to ask for that Donald Trump said he was going to ask for, like eliminating their ballistic missile stockpiles. That's hogwash. No one with any brain is going to insist on pushing that. But if we've got this one under our belt, so to speak, that is to say they can enrich to that low level, which is their perfect right within the NPT, all we're talking about is the verification regime afterwards. And that's where the devil's in the details, of course, but that's a team of experts who will work out how the IAEA will fit in, how third countries might fit in, how Iran will be allowed to do other things with more highly enriched uranium coming from a consortium of countries that might include Russia, maybe Qatar and others that would provide them with a little higher level for medical purposes and so forth. It's just talking that out. That might take 6 weeks. It might take 6 months, but it's experts. Ooh, did I say experts in the Trump administration? Hope there are some. Hadn't fired them all. Working it out, working the details out for how they're going to verify what they agree to. And that shouldn't take that long. You should be able to achieve an agreement. And if I were the Iranians, Nima, I would ask for the very first action under the signed and sealed agreement to be lifting sanctions, at least primary sanctions. You lift those sanctions, and then we can go on to the rest of the deal. Because look what Obama did. Obama and Kerry and Moniz and the rest of them with the JCPOA. They never lifted sanctions. And Iran was caught out with, hey, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and you haven't done what you're supposed to be doing. And then the second thing, Nima, if I could get it, if I were the Iranians, I'd say, you got to convince me in some way, sign it in blood or something, get the Congress to sign it in blood, whatever, that when someone else comes in 3.5 years, they don't back off the deal like you did. I mean, I would insist on that if I were Tehran, those two provisions. Quick sanctions relief and a guarantee that this deal will at least adhere for the years specified in the deal. Or if it's ad nauseum, ad infinitum, then maybe they ought to have some kind of blessing of it by Congress. Maybe not a formal treaty, which requires 2/3 of the Senate, but at least a congressional resolution that says this Congress binds any future Congress to this deal. I wouldn't take it if I were Iran otherwise.
2 days ago, Larry Tucker Carlson tweeted that he was criticizing Mark Levin of Fox News, the way that he's trying to somehow convince Donald Trump and his administration to go to war with Iran. And he was somehow, the way that he was describing the situation, he felt that this guy could be convincing for the administration. Maybe he has some sort of leverage, some sort of connection in the administration. And he was so concerned, by the way. You read the tweet that he wrote, it shows how concerned he was. And we've learned that the commander of the U.S. Central Command, and he said that we presented operational scenarios to Donald Trump and the Secretary of Defense in the event of diplomatic efforts with Iran fail. We were talking about attacking Iran before, and you mentioned that you were part of those people. You were participating in the meetings that they were planning to attack Iran. That's various scenarios that they have been studied for many years. Do they really think that Iran is Iraq, is Afghanistan, is Libya?
Well, I have to caveat what you just said or qualify it with. When I was in on the war planning, we actually did conduct military operations against Iran. This was Operation Praying Mantis and Operation Earnest Will. In Praying Mantis, we sank one of their destroyers with all hands on board. And we were going to sink the second one. And Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, called us off. A very different Iran at that time. Very different Iran. Not nearly possessed of the capabilities they are now. Because anytime you do something like that, anytime you humble a state like that, and then on top of that, we shot down the Airbus, the airliner with Vincennes in the Persian Gulf and killed, 270 some odd Iranian civilians. That really set them back, I think. And they made a decision at that point that would never come about again. And ever since then, they have been building up to a confrontation with us in every form that they could do it, but most decidedly in ballistic missiles and their brothers and sisters. They have an incredible horde of missiles now. Now, let me back up and say that even at that time, Lieutenant General Van Riper, my boss at the Marine Corps War College in the beginning, was asked to conduct a war game. He was the head of the Marine Corps Development Command and Education and Development Command, and wargaming was under his auspices. And he conducted a war game, and the results of it were so detrimental to the United States that they compelled him to do it again. And this was a computer-based war game. Computers played this game. He did it again, and we lost again. So I reiterate that just to tell you that even in that stage, when it was only a couple of years after Praying Mantis and Earnest Will, the Iranians had built up a capability to do some real damage. Now they have the capability far surpassing the Houthis in Yemen, for example. And look what they did to us. And they're a much bigger country, a huge population, almost 90 million, tremendous strategic depth and terrain. It'd be a disaster. If it was a disaster in 1988, 89, 90, it would be a terrible disaster in 2025. I mean, we would lose, and we'd lose badly. We would be much more soundly defeated than we were defeated in the Red Sea with the Yemeni. It would be a resounding defeat. We'd lose carriers. We'd lose other surface craft. If we were, after the first carrier and maybe one of its escorts, if we were stupid enough to put other ships in harm's way within missile range, and here we're talking some pretty good distance, better go hide behind Diego Garcia, for example, we'd lose more. And we could not put forces ashore, because if we tried to put forces ashore, they would destroy the landing fleet. And whatever they didn't destroy in the water, they would destroy on the beaches. So how would you enter Iran? And people have said to me, okay, well, you go to Israel first. You load up in Israel, you'd get the IDF as your flank guard or whatever, or maybe they'd be the advance party and you would attack across Syria. Well, what do you think would be happening to you the whole time you were attacking across Syria? Think this. Think Desert Shield, Desert Storm, mostly Desert Storm. Think Ukraine, and think open desert, not Ukraine with woods and trees and all that kind of thing. You got open desert and open country, and not much between, for example, where you would embark in the Golan and Damascus and then further. You'd get really heavily taken to task with missiles and such before you even got to Iran's border. So I don't see any way where we could militarily, in a conventional sense, attack Iran without taking major casualties. Now, if we were a 2 or 3 million man military, or 5 or 6 million man military, and if we were a 1 million man army and a 500,000 man Marine Corps, or men and women now, then it might be a different proposition, but the casualties would be 50% of that force. So this is that's the reason, Nima, that they're planning a nuclear option. Guarantee you that's the reason they're doing it. And that's my fear. It's been my fear ever since we started about, 10 years ago or so, really taking China on in a serious sort of way over Taiwan or the South China Sea or whatever, because I know what it devolves to. It devolves to our conventional military being utterly destroyed. Now, China's is too, pretty much. So we sit there staring at each other across the Taiwan Straits, metaphorically speaking, and neither one of us can do anything because we've treated our air and naval forces so badly that they can't do much more. And no one in the United States is thinking of invading China with a land army. And China can't come and project power towards the United States and wouldn't want to anyway. So what do? Well, then you go to nuclear weapons. And that's the way all the war games I played in devolved in the past. And things haven't changed. They've gotten worse. They've gotten worse in terms of the standoff. If anything has changed, it's we're weaker and they're stronger. And the same situation exists with Iran. Not quite as powerful as China, but with Russia backing them up, Iran could present a formidable foe, one that we probably could not defeat.
How much weight do the Arab states possess when it comes to the calculation in the mind of Donald Trump? How important are they?
Would the Arab states join in?
No, just
they'd hold our coat. They'd hold our coat while we did it.
They know that if something happens, they're gonna be destroyed.
They're gonna
be destroyed.
They're gonna suffer. And our assets in the region will suffer. Our headquarters on Bahrain will be destroyed. Al Udeid in Qatar will probably be destroyed. Some of the airfields in Saudi Arabia will probably be destroyed. Those around Military City, for example. Our ongoing and reception facility, the largest in the world in Kuwait, will probably be destroyed. There won't be much left. And they'll probably close the Strait of Hormuz and say, up yours to Saudi Arabia and shipments of oil that way. One of the reasons, Nima, that Saudi Arabia persisted in the war against Yemen was because they wanted to build that pipeline over to the Red Sea so they could alleviate some of the pressure on the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Well, they didn't get to do that. So the Gulf is still the Saudis' major exit point.
Larry, when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine and the way that Donald Trump somehow, I don't know if he's trying to do something. So far, he didn't do anything but talking about the talks, nothing else.
Yeah.
Here is, Larry, what the NATO Secretary General said about the conflict in Ukraine.
Agree with Kyiv that to end this war is going to require additional long-range strikes into Russia to take out its industrial capacity?
Well, to end this war, we need Putin to come to the negotiating table and not with this historian who is now popping up in Istanbul twice and again telling us about the history of Russia and Ukraine from whatever, the 12th century, I don't know what it was. And constantly restating what they stated already in 2022, you need a Russia which is serious, wants to negotiate and end the war. And to get there, it all, I think, starts, of course, with keeping Ukraine strong in the fight.
Does this guy know what he's talking about?
I love it when he admits he doesn't do history. I don't want to hear that history. I don't want the history. That history might be totally adverse to my interests. Therefore, I don't want to hear that history. Well, you can't expect him to say anything else. I mean, he took over from Stoltenberg, and the whole Brussels leadership, especially the civilian side, has been brain dead for a long time. Wooden-headed, not brain dead, wooden-headed. Remember Barbara Tuchman's marvelous term about World War I and the wooden-headed people who led us into World War I, the greatest slaughter the world had ever seen at that time. Well, that's what these people are. They're wooden-headed. He's right to an extent that if you're going to end the war, you've got to come to Istanbul or wherever it might be seriously and intent on ending the war. But he's aiming his dart at the wrong direction. It's aim your dart at Kyiv, aim your dart at Zelensky. Putin came and Putin said, I know what my parameters are. Here they are. They are not changeable. They're not morphable. You cannot back me off of any of them. I've won. Thank you very much. What are yours? And what does he get? He gets a long-range attack into Russia provided by all the intelligence agencies of the people he hates. It's, these people are smoking something there, and it's very cheap grade stuff. Not for nothing. I heard this tale the other day that every time these jokers travel around, you can smell the cocaine, as it were, in their rail cars. I don't doubt that a bit. Maybe it's apocryphal, but I wouldn't doubt it, especially with people like Starmer.
Larry, he said, NATO Secretary General said that Europe would benefit from the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine. And I don't see that coming from the United States. I don't see that coming from the Trump administration. It should come from European view of the conflict in Ukraine. And who's running the show in Ukraine right now if that's not the Trump administration?
I think right now, if I were to be pointedly correct, I would be so if I said MI6 in Britain were more in charge of things than anyone else, and then I'd put Merz and Macron in the same group. Here's what I said this morning, and I've thought about it. I said it this morning with, not having given it deep thought, but since that time, I have given it some pretty profound thought. And I think we're looking at a situation, and this is what really bothers me because Trump can't possibly conceptualize this. He stumbled on it. In the beginning, he stumbled on it, but he won't conceptualize it in a way that would make it achievable and infuse his team with that. And that is that you need to leap over Ukraine, Mr. President, and you are the only person who can. Macron can't, Starmer can't, Merz can't. None of those guys can jump over Ukraine. They're mired in it. Physically and mentally, they're mired in it. You're not. You need to jump over Ukraine, wear track shoes so you can step on Zelensky as you do so, and go to Moscow, mentally, if not figuratively, and say, I'm here to make and forge a new relationship between Moscow and Washington, to include nuclear weapons. That's going to be a huge component of my discussion paper, and I hope it is yours too. And we need to work on that. Despite this little war down there under our feet that's killing lots of people, yours included, because of the stupidity of the previous U.S. administrations, including my own. I wouldn't admit that if I were Trump, probably, but and all the people in NATO, and including all the administrations that preceded them in Washington, because they expanded NATO. I take that point as a given, but you and I need to effect a new relationship between our two capitals and our two countries, economic, financial, and otherwise, nuclear weapons wise too. And to hell with those people down there. They better stop as we're doing this, or they will be out in the cold, really out in the cold, with no coat and lots of snow coming down. And then present that same thing to the key leaders in NATO, in private. But he's the only person who can do that. There's not another leader in the world that can do that. He's the only person that can do that and bring a true end to this conflict. The devil's in the details later of working out the peace on the ground, but that can be done. Getting that relationship renewed between Russia and the United States is key, and it's the most important issue. He had that inkling, Nima. When he first came in, he had that visceral inkling that that's what was to do, and he thought he could do it because he and Putin knew each other. They're buds, And now he's lost that, apparently. That was his trump card. Literally, trump card.
By the way, it shows that how somehow he's disconnected with the reality on the ground in Ukraine. He said the same with the case of Iran. He said, I don't know why these guys are so stubborn in the way they're negotiating with the United States. Because you look at Russia, look at Iran, they didn't change their position. They're repeating the same sort of...
He's like Ruta. He doesn't do history. Except I think both of them are afflicted with another condition too. They don't do knowledge. Historical or otherwise, they don't do knowledge. They do transactions. They do money. They do what's in front of their face at the moment it's in front of their face. They don't do future. They don't do past. They just do present that's in front of their face. They do their inbox. That's it. And these kinds of leaders are dangerous, very dangerous.
I don't know why would he think that Vladimir Putin would change his mind because of Donald Trump and his friendship. I don't know if there is a friendship between the two presidents, but he seems that he feels so much close to Putin that he's going to do this for me. But that didn't work. Russia is fighting for more than 3 years of the conflict. They're just casualties. Look at the rate of casualties. Look at the way that both countries have been suffering during the conflict.
True, but the Ukrainian casualties are 20-1.
Yeah,
the Russian. But there is power there. There is power there because Putin has said, and he means, in my view, that he wants a new relationship with Washington. Back up to my original formulation about the geopolitical scope of the world right now, with all the power leaking out of the West and going to the East, with China as the principal magnet. And Russia, situated as it is in both worlds, has a decision to make. It's faced this decision before, but never in such stark terms, not in the last 1,000 years anyway. Starting with Catherine, it made a decision that it was coming to Europe. I mean, her court even was restricted to the French language. Several more times between Catherine, Alexander, who followed her, and then all the way up to the modern Soviet state, if you will, they made an attempt. Even the Soviet Union, even Joseph Stalin, even Nikita Khrushchev, they made attempts from time to time to have better relations with Europe, if not become a part of Europe, not just geographically, but politically and otherwise. Then comes the ultimate chance in 1992 and 93, when they were promised that the road was open by the U.S. president, promised that it was open. And you have to admit, promised by Mitterrand, by Thatcher and Major, and by Kohl, three of the principal leaders in Europe at the time. That was all reneged on. So they've been rebuffed again. They have been rebuffed again. Putin sensed that rebuff. Yeltsin got drunk over it. Yeltsin had another bottle of vodka. He didn't want to deal with it. Putin sensed it, and since he took the reins of power, has been trying to reverse it, been trying to open the avenue again into Europe. He failed, and Ukraine was the denouement, if you will, of that failure. He finally said the special military, even then he was willing to stop it. He was willing to stop it a couple of months in, a month in, remember? And we almost had an agreement to do just that. And Ukraine would be so much better off today had they inked that agreement. But they didn't do it because we were prodding them. We were prodding him still. We were doing it. We've been doing it since Bill Clinton became president of the United States. Every president in between have been doing it. Obama slacked off a little because he saw the unreality of it, but he didn't slack off enough. Bang, we picked right back up with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, too, for that matter. I don't think Trump knew what he was doing. He was just following the dictates of his crew that he'd brought in that time, John Bolton prominently. So we're looking at a situation where we created the mess we're in right now, and we're the only ones who can get the world and Europe and us out of this mess. And Putin is wondering, should I quit even trying? Should I quit even trying and just throw in my lot with this inexorable movement to the east? Now, he knows if he does that, that the dominant power in that movement is China. If he does that, he's yielding himself to a dominant power about whom history tells him much, but modern times don't give him all that much information about. Now, he's met Xi Jinping, he's talked with Xi Jinping, and I'm sure he's got his views and everything, but I will be willing to bet you that he would rather reopen relations with the United States and balance his relationship with China by so doing, and sort of play the middleman in the concert of powers that's developing in this new multinodal world, than go wholly that way. We're preventing that. And we're the dumbest on the face of the earth. I lost you.
I don't know if you watched the interview that Medinsky did with RT, Russia Today. He mentions, Larry, he was talking about the situation, the talks. He's the head of the head of these negotiations on the part of Russians. And he said something
He's the one Ruth called a school teacher or something like that.
Yeah.
That's for him.
He said something so deep, Larry. He said, when I talk with them, look at their eyes are Russians. They're talking Russians. These are Russian people that we are negotiating with. They feel so close to these people that came to the table. It hurts a lot when you hear that. You see, you're negotiating, you're talking with your brothers, by the way that is.
Look at the history of this. I mean, if you go back 1,200 years, or even 400 years, or even 200 years, the history just screams that at you. And Scott was talking today about this general he's met, and how good he is, and how hard he fights for Russia, and he's a hero to his men. You know, he runs up to the front in a BMP and rescues the squad that's been encircled. A 3-star general. I think it was 2 then. He's been promoted to 3-star. He's Chechen. He's Chechen. Russia was a big country. Russia is a big country. It has lots of people. And some of those people are Ukrainians. We just don't understand that. We don't do history. We don't do history. And apparently not many Europeans do history either, especially Dutchmen.
Just to wrap it up, Larry, the head of German intelligence said that
Russia, the DND that produced Curveball.
But he said that more than 80% of Russians today support Vladimir Putin. This is totally more than 80%.
No doubt.
Russia, the Russian president today. This is huge. This is huge that it was confessed by the head of intelligence of Germany, who feels that they're fighting Russians in Ukraine, who they feel. I don't know, Larry. These people, do they bring this sort of data into their calculations? Because he said this. He said that if Russia defeats Ukraine, we're going to be the next target. These arguments are so much out of touch, so much stupid. Nobody can believe that.
Who,
I don't know if they're.
Who said that now? The head of the
The head of German intelligence.
He said 80% of the Russians support Putin, and if we let Putin take Ukraine, he'll come on for more.
Yeah.
Well, then he's an idiot. He's still the guy that was there before, I guess, who produced Curveball. That's nonsense. That's just absolute nonsense. One, Putin doesn't have the capacity to. He does not have the capacity to take the entire swath of NATO on from north to south. He simply doesn't. Two, he doesn't want to. Three, what he wants is a rapprochement with the United States of America. If one with Europe or individual countries in Europe happens to, that's great. But what he wants is leap over their head right to Washington, and he wants a better relationship there. And I think he thinks if that occurs, then the rest will slowly come along. Otherwise, he's got to go full hog, full bore, totally to the east. And as I said, I don't think he wants to do that. He doesn't mind dealing with China. He doesn't mind taking oil from China or selling oil to China. I love that the other day. I heard that Trump was really irritated when he got the briefing that China got 90.4% of its oil from Russia last year or whatever. Got to stop that. We're going to sanction those boys. We're going to get those ships on the high seas. We're going to sanction them. And he turned around and told his cabinet, the ones that are responsible for the sort of thing, Treasury mostly, I guess, sanction those boys. Sanction them. Come with me. Come to me with a plan for sanction them so we can stop that. We need to stop that. Hogwash. He's not going to stop that. That's the world. That's the way power works now. If Russia wants to sell oil to China, it's damn sure going to sell oil to China, and they'll figure out a way to get it there. By the way, they'll probably get it there by normal means, and we won't do squat about it. But, I can't stop coming back to that old original formulation. I think it was Henry Kissinger that put it out the most recently. You don't ever want to force China and Russia together. Not force them together, because then you have an insurmountable combination. You cannot beat that combination. And that's what we've done. That's what we've done. And Putin has told us repeatedly now, and with Trump, he's reiterated it, I think, I'd like to have a good relationship with you. I want to balance, I'm here in the middle. I want to balance this giant over here that's getting so powerful, it hurts my heart to think about it. And you, who are kind of dissipating your power through your own stupidity, but through natural causes too, because empires don't last forever, but you're still pretty powerful. And I want to have good relations with both of you, not just one over the other. That's smart. That's Putin.
I hope there is somebody in the Trump administration that can hear you, Colonel.
I know there are a couple of people in there, a couple of people in the Pentagon who feel that way too. And I hope their message, I don't know what kind of stopper Hegseth has put on these people. I'm hearing in some areas it's a pretty solid stopper. One of the areas being women in the service, and another area being trans in uniform and things like that. But those are despicable issues, but they're little issues in terms of the bigger ones that, like you were talking about. I know there are people in the Pentagon who think a war with Iran would be really bad, really bad. Is that getting through? Is it getting through Hegseth? I know it was getting through to Biden. I'm wondering if it's getting through to Trump.
Hope so.
So too. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Colonel, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great pleasure as always.
See you for a short time on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. See you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.